Welcome, my weary night wanderer. You've clicked on this video because, let's be honest, you're either deeply curious about the meaning of life, or you just want a nap with background philosophy that makes you sound smart in your dreams. Either way, you're in the right place. Tonight, we'll drift into the twilight realm of existentialist philosophy. Those thinkers who stared into the cosmic void, shrugged, and said, "Yep, that's life." Don't worry. You won't need a degree in French literature or a bottle of red wine to follow along. All you need is a pillow, a blanket, and perhaps a willingness to confront the fact that your cat might understand life better than you do. As your eyelids grow heavier, we'll wander through the streets of 19th century Russia with Dostoevsky, where misery is practically a civic duty. We'll bask under the Mediterranean sun with Albert Camus, who made absurdity sound oddly refreshing. And we'll pay a visit to Jean-Paul Sartre, the man who told us that existence precedes essence, which is philosopher speak for "There's no IKEA manual for being human." It may sound heavy, but don't worry, you're allowed to laugh. Existentialists were often hilarious, though sometimes unintentionally. After all, what's funnier than humans demanding ultimate answers from a silent universe? So lie back, breathe slowly, let your mind float. Tonight, we'll find comfort in the strangest truth of all, that maybe life has no meaning, and that's perfectly okay. It always happens at the same time, doesn't it? The clock ticks into those late hours, the house grows quiet, and you finally sink into your bed. You've got your blankets arranged in that complicated origami way that only makes sense to you. Your phone has been put down. Well, okay, let's be honest. You've put it down 3 times already, and then picked it back up to check if the universe has changed in the last 2 minutes. Spoiler, it hasn't. And just when you're about to drift off, here it comes, the uninvited guest. The question, the one that sneaks into your head like a raccoon rummaging in your garbage at night. The question of all questions. What's the point of any of this? You could have been worrying about something practical, like whether you remembered to lock the front door, or whether tomorrow's meeting will be awkward because you waved at someone today who didn't wave back. But no. Your brain decides it's the perfect time to launch an existential inquiry worthy of a philosophy conference. There you are, warm, cozy, slightly drooling on the pillow, and suddenly you're thinking, why am I here? What is existence? And does my cat know the answer and just isn't telling me? There's something uniquely cruel about the way nighttime magnifies these questions. During the day, we are distracted. The errands, the emails, the conversations with people we secretly hope will end sooner rather than later. All of them form a buffer against the big questions. But at night, with the world quiet, our minds finally hear themselves. It's as if the silence outside turns up the volume on the inside, and suddenly every small worry expands into a universe-sized dilemma. That minor mistake you made in 8th grade? Oh yes, it's back on stage for an encore performance. And standing beside it, in a very dramatic spotlight, is the thought that maybe, just maybe, life has no ultimate meaning. Now, why does this happen right before bed? Scientists, who love to put wires on people's heads and watch them think, would tell you it's partly biological. The brain, as it winds down from the day, tends to drift into a looser, dreamier mode of thought. The rational guards fall asleep before you do, and the wandering part of your mind takes the night shift. And what does the wandering part of your mind love to do? It loves to wander into dark forests of unanswerable questions. Congratulations! Your neurons have decided to host a midnight philosophy seminar. But there's another reason too, one that philosophers themselves would smile knowingly at. Nighttime is when we are closest to the little death of sleep. We surrender control. We close our eyes and slip into unconsciousness, not knowing if we'll dream of flying or of showing up to high school in our underwear again. The fragility of it all reminds us of the ultimate fragility. The fact that one day, this laying down will not be temporary. Death has always been the silent roommate of philosophy. And bedtime is when we hear his footsteps most clearly. Of course, most people don't phrase it so dramatically. Nobody lying in bed thinks, "Ah yes, I sense the shadow of my mortality upon my duvet." Instead, we just feel the vague tug of unease. The pillow is soft, but our thoughts are sharp. We may suddenly remember that one day everyone we know will be gone. We may think about how many years we've wasted worrying about what other people think, or binge-watching shows that never got good after season 3. We may realize, painfully, that there is no grand scoreboard in the sky giving us points for productivity. And so, under the dim light of the alarm clock, we wonder, is life supposed to mean something? The funny part, if you can call it that, is that philosophers have been wrestling with this very thing for centuries, and they usually did it while awake. We, however, like to wrestle with it when we should be sleeping. Why? Perhaps because the question is never really gone. It lurks in the background, politely waiting its turn. And the moment we run out of distractions, when the world outside quiets and the lights go off, it sees its chance. Oh, you're not busy anymore? Wonderful. Let's talk about the meaning of life. There's a certain universality to this. Whether you're a farmer in the 12th century, staring at the moon, or a modern office worker, staring at the glow of your phone, the question visits all of us. It's democratic in that way, not caring if you're rich, poor, busy, bored, or halfway asleep. Some people embrace it. They keep notebooks by their bed and scribble down their midnight revelations, convinced they've discovered profound truths. The next morning, they look at their notes and see, life is like a sandwich, or maybe soup. And while that's not exactly the next great philosophical system, it shows the honesty of the midnight mind. But others push the question away. They distract themselves with a lullaby of scrolling, or the hum of a podcast about something trivial, anything to keep from hearing the whisper, "What's it all for?" Yet even in avoidance, the question leaves its imprint. We wake up the next morning with a faint residue of unease, like smoke in the air after a fire we pretended not to see. And here's where the philosophers actually help. They remind us that this midnight questioning isn't a bug in the system. It's the system itself. To be human is to wonder. We are the animal that not only eats and sleeps and scrolls through recipes we'll never cook, but also asks, why? We ask why there is something rather than nothing. We ask why we're here, why it matters, and why it keeps us up at 2 in the morning when we should really be counting sheep instead of contemplating the void. The truth is, the midnight question isn't there to torment us. It's a signal. It's the psyche's way of reminding us that we're alive, conscious, aware, and full of longing. And maybe, if handled gently, it can even be comforting. For if the universe is silent, at least we are not. If life has no inherent meaning, then we get the strange and terrifying freedom to invent one. And maybe that's the answer that lets us finally sleep. Not that life comes pre-packaged with purpose, like socks from a store, but that purpose is something we knit ourselves, clumsily, often dropping a stitch, but creating warmth nonetheless. And as your eyelids grow heavier now, think of it this way. Tonight, your mind has wandered into the oldest question in the world. You have kept company with kings and beggars, poets and prisoners, all of whom have stared at the ceiling in the dark and asked, why? And while no final answer has ever arrived, the act of asking places you in that grand human tradition. You are not alone in your wondering. In fact, you are more human for it. So let the question be your lullaby, a reminder that even in uncertainty, there is beauty. The pillow is soft. The night is deep. And in the silence, you are part of something vast and strangely comforting. The great unanswerable mystery of existence itself. Imagine, if you will, a dinner party. Not the kind with polite small talk about the weather or someone's new sourdough starter. This is a dinner party hosted in the twilight realm of philosophy, where the seating arrangement alone is enough to make you nervous. At the head of the table sits Fyodor Dostoevsky, looking as though he's just returned from a duel with his own conscience. Across from him is Søren Kierkegaard, the melancholy Dane, who seems like the kind of guest who would sigh dramatically while buttering his bread. Jean-Paul Sartre is already lighting a cigarette inside the dining room, insisting that the smoke is part of his personal freedom. And then, of course, Albert Camus, who, despite everything, looks irritatingly good in a simple, open-collared shirt, like a man who just walked off a sunlit beach and into your kitchen. Now, if you were hoping for cheerful banter about vacations or favorite desserts, you may be disappointed. These four men are existentialists, or close cousins of the breed, and they have very particular ways of seeing the world. Still, they're not here to scold you. They're here to keep you company in that strange moment when you wonder what it all means. Think of them as your slightly eccentric dinner companions for the night, each bringing their own dish of philosophy to the table. Dostoevsky arrives first, carrying a casserole dish labeled Suffering à la Russe. His contribution to the party is the belief that human freedom is both a gift and a torment. He knew suffering personally: prison camps, illness, poverty, gambling debts, and yet he insisted that these struggles revealed something essential about human nature. For Dostoevsky, it was not enough to talk about freedom as the ability to pursue happiness. True freedom, he argued, was the terrifying capacity to choose wrongly, to sabotage ourselves, even to destroy what we love. He illustrates this through his characters, the underground man, Raskolnikov, Ivan Karamazov, each of whom seems to be locked in a duel with their own souls. To dine with Dostoevsky is to accept that your appetizer may taste like despair, but it will also remind you of your humanity. Kierkegaard, meanwhile, has brought a salad no one asked for but everyone ends up eating. He is the awkward, intense guest who tells you that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. In his view, humans stand on the edge of possibility, looking down into a chasm of infinite choices. That vertigo we feel, that is the essence of being human. Kierkegaard was obsessed with the individual, the single person standing before God, trembling with both fear and faith. He tells us that sometimes the only way forward is a leap, not a leap into certainty, but into the absurd trust that even in our doubt, something greater calls us. His presence at the dinner table is somber but oddly reassuring, like being told that your nervousness at parties is actually proof of your humanity. Then there's Sartre, who has somehow spilled wine on the tablecloth but insists it was an act of radical authenticity. Sartre famously declared that existence precedes essence, which sounds confusing until you realize it means that we are not born with a pre-written script. There is no cosmic blueprint for being human. We simply exist first, and only later, through our choices, define who we are. For Sartre, this freedom is exhilarating, but also suffocating. He tells us we are condemned to be free, which is not the kind of phrase you want to hear when you're trying to enjoy dessert. Yet he believed that acknowledging this burden is the path to authenticity. Sartre is the guest who lectures passionately while you're just trying to eat your mashed potatoes. But you leave the table oddly inspired to take more responsibility for your own life. And finally, Camus, the sun-drenched philosopher of absurdity. He brings a bottle of wine from Algeria and pours it generously, assuring everyone that life may be meaningless. But that doesn't mean it can't be enjoyed. Camus tells us about the absurd, the clash between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence. He paints the image of Sisyphus, forever pushing his boulder up the mountain, only to watch it roll back down. Most would see this as punishment, but Camus insists we must imagine Sisyphus happy. In that very act of pushing, in the embrace of life as it is, Camus finds dignity. He is the charming guest who convinces you that even in the face of futility, the sun still feels warm, the wine still tastes good, and tomorrow's absurd labor will come with its own strange joy. As the dinner unfolds, you might notice that these men argue. Oh, how they argue. Dostoevsky insists that without God, morality collapses. Kierkegaard nods gravely, saying faith is the leap that holds us steady. Sartre rolls his eyes and declares that God is a human invention, and therefore we are alone with our choices. Camus leans back, smirking, and says that whether or not God exists, the silence of the universe is what we must live with. The arguments rise and fall like waves, but beneath them lies a shared recognition that being human is difficult, confusing, and often absurd, but it is also profoundly alive. Listening to them, you begin to see that each has brought something to the table that you yourself feel at night. Dostoevsky's tortured freedom mirrors your own self-sabotage. Kierkegaard's anxious leap resembles the choices you've had to make without certainty. Sartre's radical freedom echoes that sense of responsibility that sometimes feels too heavy, and Camus' absurd hero reassures you that maybe, just maybe, it's okay to laugh, even when the universe refuses to explain itself. By the end of the evening, the plates are empty. The arguments have softened, and the guests are leaning back in their chairs. There is no grand conclusion, no final toast that ties everything neatly together. And yet, as you sit among them, you realize that the value of the dinner was not in solving life's mysteries, but in sharing the experience of wrestling with them. Each philosopher, in his own way, has given you company in your midnight questioning. And as you drift now, your eyes heavy, you might imagine yourself at that table, not as an intruder, but as part of the conversation, a fellow human being who wonders, who questions, and who, in the quiet of the night, takes comfort in knowing that others have asked too. There is a moment, and you may have felt it before, when the world suddenly tilts a little. It can happen at the most ordinary times. You're brushing your teeth, staring at the mirror, and suddenly it occurs to you that the face staring back is both you and not you. That this whole routine foam, rinse, spit is part of a pattern you've been performing for years, and will keep performing until, well, until you stop. Or maybe you're standing in line at the grocery store, eyeing the magazines at the checkout, when it strikes you that the celebrities on the covers look suspiciously unchanged from last year's covers, while you, tragically, have aged. And in that moment of sudden detachment, you think, what am I even doing here? What is any of this? That is the beginning of what Albert Camus called absurd awareness. Not absurd in the sense of clown shoes and banana peels, but absurd in the sense of a mismatch, a dissonance between what we desperately crave and what the world actually provides. Human beings, Camus observed, are question-asking creatures. We want explanations, reasons, meaning. We want the universe to be like a parent who sits us down, pats us on the shoulder, and says, "Here's the plan, kid. Here's why you're alive. Here's the point of it all. And here's a handy chart of your life's milestones." But what we actually get is silence. A big cosmic shrug. It's like shouting into the void, "Why am I here?" And the void replying, "New phone. Who dis?" For Camus, the absurd is born in this collision. The collision between our hunger for ultimate meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it. It's not that life is nonsense, exactly. It's that life doesn't add up to the neat, reassuring story we want it to be. And what's more, Camus insisted this isn't a minor glitch. It's the very structure of our condition. We are sense-making creatures. In a world that doesn't make sense, we are question askers in a universe that doesn't answer. Now, that sounds depressing at first. And, to be fair, it can be. No one enjoys realizing that the great cosmic teacher is ignoring us while doodling in the margins of existence. But Camus found something liberating in this recognition. In fact, he thought it was the starting point for living authentically. To realize that life doesn't add up is to stop waiting for it to do so. It's like discovering that the IKEA furniture you've been struggling to assemble for 3 hours is actually missing half the screws. Once you accept that, you stop expecting the perfect bookshelf and start improvising, maybe turning the planks into a rustic coffee table instead. The relief comes because once we acknowledge the absurd, we can stop pretending. We no longer need to chase every promise of ultimate meaning, every system that says it has the answers, if only we follow the rules. Religions, political ideologies, self-help programs, all of them. In Camus' view, try to sell us a sense that life ultimately makes sense. And while they can provide comfort, he warned they also demand that we close our eyes to the truth. To accept the absurd is to say, no more closing my eyes. No more comforting lies. I'll live with the truth, however stark. And strangely, in that honesty, there is freedom. Imagine carrying around a heavy backpack filled with rocks labeled, "What's my purpose? Where's my destiny? What does it all mean?" Now, imagine setting it down. Your shoulders ache, but your back is free. The weight is gone. The walk continues, but lighter. That is what absurd awareness feels like. Life doesn't add up. And that's precisely why you're free to create your own way of adding it up. Even if your sums never balance perfectly. Camus gave vivid examples of how the absurd sneaks up on us. He wrote about moments when the world suddenly feels strange, uncanny. A man sees his reflection in a window and feels like a stranger to himself. A worker realizes that his daily commute, repeated endlessly, is a loop with no deeper justification. A woman hears her own laughter at a party and wonders if it really belongs to her. These are small cracks in the facade, glimpses that the story we've been telling ourselves might be just that, a story. And yet, in the crack, light seeps through. There's also humor in it. If you squint, think of how often we take ourselves incredibly seriously. We fret about how others perceive us, whether we're successful enough, whether our outfits match. Then we remember, in absurd awareness, that we're standing on a tiny rock spinning around a star. In a universe so vast, it makes our daily worries look like specks on a speck of dust. It's not that our concerns don't matter, they do. To us, but they don't carry the ultimate weight we sometimes imagine. Camus' insight encourages us to chuckle at our predicament. It's tragic, yes, but also kind of hilarious. We are little creatures demanding ultimate meaning from an indifferent cosmos, like ants writing angry Yelp reviews about the weather. This is why Camus' philosophy, while often painted as dark, actually contains a strange optimism. He did not say life is meaningless. He said life has no inherent meaning given to us from outside. And that is different. It means that if there is meaning, it's the kind we weave ourselves, thread by thread, through our choices, our relationships, our moments of joy and kindness and creativity. The universe doesn't provide the script, but that doesn't stop us from improvising the play. Of course, some people hear this and panic. Wait, they say, if there's no ultimate meaning, doesn't that mean anything goes? Doesn't that mean chaos? But Camus would gently shake his head. No. It means honesty. It means you can stop exhausting yourself with the impossible task of finding the hidden purpose, and instead live fully in the only world you've got. The strange relief of realizing life doesn't add up is that you stop trying to force the arithmetic. You stop waiting for an answer that never comes, and you start listening to the silence. And in the silence, you might hear the laughter of children, the crash of waves, the sound of your own heartbeat. Those sounds are not answers, but they are real. And perhaps they're enough. So as you lie here now, letting your own thoughts drift, notice that you've probably had your own moments of absurd awareness, the sudden sense of strangeness, the fleeting feeling that things don't quite line up. Rather than fight it, you might, as Camus suggested, lean into it. Accept that the story doesn't add up. Accept that the math problem has no solution. And then, instead of despair, feel the relief. You are free to stop calculating. You are free to live, to breathe, to sleep, without needing it all to make sense. Picture a man in ancient Greece. He has calves like a Tour de France cyclist, and a look on his face that says, "I regret my life choices." This is Sisyphus, the mythological king who angered the gods one too many times and was sentenced to a punishment both simple and cruel. He must push a giant boulder up a mountain, and every time he nears the top, the boulder rolls back down. He trudges back down after it, only to push it up again. Forever. No lunch breaks, no cheat days. Just eternal cardio. Most people, upon hearing this myth, think it's the ultimate story of futility. Here is a man condemned to meaningless labor, forever sweating for nothing. It's like running on a treadmill at the gym, except you don't even get a water bottle or an inspirational playlist. And yet, Camus looked at this myth and said something shocking. We must imagine Sisyphus happy. Happy? Really? The poor guy has been enrolled in the eternal CrossFit of the underworld, and we're supposed to believe he's grinning about it? But Camus wasn't being cruel. He was showing us how absurd awareness transforms even punishment into possibility. Sisyphus knows the truth of his condition. He knows the gods have sentenced him to futility. He knows the boulder will never stay put. And yet, in knowing, he finds his freedom. He is no longer tricked by false hope. He doesn't imagine that one more push will finally solve it. He accepts his fate. And in that acceptance, he becomes greater than his punishment. Camus wrote that the crucial moment is not when Sisyphus is straining against the rock, but when he walks back down the mountain. This is his pause, his reflective moment. He knows exactly what awaits him. More labor, more futility, more rolling boulder. But in that very awareness, he transcends. The gods wanted to humiliate him, but they cannot take away his consciousness. And as long as he knows, as long as he accepts, without illusion, he remains free. Here's where the humor comes in. Imagine Sisyphus as a modern-day gym member. He swipes his card at Boulder Fitness, walks in, and there's just one piece of equipment, a massive, round rock. No Zumba classes, no smoothie bar, just him and his eternal workout buddy. The other gym members don't exist, because they all quit after 5 minutes. But Sisyphus keeps showing up. He has the best attendance record in history. And maybe, after a while, he starts to enjoy it. The sun on his back, the rhythm of pushing, the way his muscles feel alive. He knows he'll never get to post "achievement unlocked" on social media, but he finds dignity in the sheer act of doing. Camus saw in this myth a mirror of our own condition. We too push boulders. We work, we cook, we clean, we answer emails, we do laundry, and no matter how often we fold the clothes, they unfold again. The inbox refills, the dishes pile up, the to-do list regenerates like a mythical hydra. Life is, in its way, a series of rolling boulders. And yet, Camus insisted, we can find joy in the pushing, not because the boulder stays up, but because we are alive to push it at all. This is not naive optimism. Camus doesn't suggest we pretend the boulder will one day stay put. He rejects false hope. Instead, he embraces the reality, absurd as it is, and says, the work itself, the sweat, the rhythm, can be enough. In other words, Sisyphus gets the best, most tragic, most existential gym membership of all time. And somehow, he manages to smile through it. Think of your own routines. The way the alarm clock rings, you hit snooze, you drag yourself up, you repeat the same rituals day after day. It can feel like futility. But Camus asks us to imagine ourselves, like Sisyphus, embracing it. Imagine finding joy in the act itself, not in the result. The coffee brewed, even if tomorrow you'll brew again. The floor swept, even if dust returns. The email answered, even if more arrive. In these repetitions, there can be a kind of freedom, once we stop demanding permanence. And so, when Camus says, we must imagine Sisyphus happy, he's really saying, we must imagine ourselves happy too. In our own absurd labor, we must embrace the repetition, the futility, the endlessness, not as defeat, but as life. Because to live is to push boulders, and to know it, and to smile, anyway. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, picture Sisyphus on his mountain, not groaning, not despairing, but walking calmly, maybe even humming to himself as he returns to his rock. His punishment is eternal, but his consciousness is his own. He knows the absurd, and in knowing, he is free. And perhaps, in your dreams, you too will find your boulder, and push it not in misery, but with a strange and quiet joy. There is a peculiar character wandering through the corridors of literature, a man who seems to delight in poking holes in every attempt at happiness, including his own. He is known simply as the underground man, and he comes from the imagination of Fyodor Dostoevsky, that Russian novelist who made suffering into something like an Olympic sport. If you've ever known someone who could ruin their own birthday party just to prove a point, then you already have an idea of the underground man's personality. He is the star of Dostoevsky's novella Notes from Underground, and he spends most of his time writing bitter confessions about how utterly miserable he is, while simultaneously congratulating himself for being smart enough to realize how miserable he island. He's the kind of person who, if invited to dinner, would refuse dessert just to demonstrate that life has no sweetness anyway, and then he'd eat the dessert later, in secret, and berate himself for enjoying it. Why would Dostoevsky create such a contradictory figure? Because he wanted to make a point about freedom, about the raw, irrational, inconvenient kind of freedom that human beings cling to, even when it works against us. The underground man is obsessed with the idea that if people were perfectly rational, we would always make choices that led to comfort, security, and happiness. But then, he says, look around. We don't. In fact, sometimes we deliberately choose what is bad for us. We sabotage ourselves, not because we're stupid, but because deep down we want to prove that we're free. Take, for example, the way the underground man talks about arithmetic. He sneers at the idea that life can be reduced to neat formulas of pleasure and pain, where humans behave like calculators maximizing outcomes. If someone tells him that 2 plus 2 equals 4, he insists he wants the right to say that sometimes it equals 5, even if that makes no sense. Why? Because to be human is to resist being predictable, to say no to the obvious, even when the obvious is correct, is the ultimate act of asserting individuality. It's the freedom to stick out your tongue at the universe, to take the long, difficult road when the short, easy one is open, just to prove that you're not a machine. There's something both maddening and familiar about this. Think of all the times in your own life when you've done something you knew would not end well. You stayed up late watching videos when you knew you had an early morning. You sent that text you knew you shouldn't. You ignored the sensible advice, not because you had a better plan, but because you didn't want to feel like your life was being dictated by sensible advice. That little rebellious spark, the "don't tell me what to do" impulse, that's the underground man in miniature. Dostoevsky takes this small impulse and magnifies it into a whole philosophy. The underground man is miserable. Yes, but he clings to that misery because it's his. He refuses the simple comforts of rational living because he wants the dignity of choosing even badly. He sabotages friendships, destroys potential romances, and lives in self-imposed isolation, all to prove to himself that he's not a cog in some rationalist machine. Of course, Dostoevsky isn't simply celebrating this behavior. He's showing us its tragedy too. The underground man's stubbornness doesn't make him happy. It makes him lonely, bitter, and cruel, especially to himself. But Dostoevsky insists that this is still profoundly human. We don't just want happiness handed to us like a treat. We want the right to earn it, reject it, or twist it into something complicated. In short, we want freedom, even if it hurts. And here's the humor of it. The underground man spends pages and pages declaring how free he is, while being utterly enslaved by his own spite. He is proof that freedom, if wielded like a blunt instrument, can cut both ways. He insists on the right to ruin his own life, and then he ruins it, and then he writes about how miserable he is because he ruined it. It's the ultimate self-perpetuating cycle of self-sabotage. But in this cycle, he proves that he is not reducible to formulas or predictions. He is human, in all his irrational glory. When you think about it, the underground man is like that part of you that whispers in the middle of the night. You don't actually have to do what's best for you. Sometimes you listen, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you eat the extra cookie, even though your stomach already hurts. Sometimes you procrastinate, even though you'll regret it. And in those moments, there's a strange defiance, almost like you're saying to the universe, I am not an algorithm. I am not a programmable creature. I am free, even if that freedom makes me ridiculous. Dostoevsky invites us to see both the comedy and the tragedy in this. On one hand, it's darkly funny that we sabotage ourselves for the sake of proving a point to nobody in particular. On the other hand, it's moving, because it shows how deeply we care about our autonomy. Better to be a miserable free person than a happy puppet. That, at least, is the underground man's credo. And so, as you let your own thoughts drift now, you might imagine him scribbling away in his underground study, muttering and contradicting himself, refusing every easy answer. You don't have to admire him. You don't even have to like him. But perhaps you can understand him. He's that stubborn, wounded voice inside all of us that would rather stumble clumsily than be carried smoothly, that would rather fail on its own terms than succeed on someone else's. In that, Dostoevsky reminds us that freedom is messy, irrational, and often self-destructive, but it is ours. If Dostoevsky's underground man is the champion of self-sabotage, Søren Kierkegaard is the philosopher of anxious possibility. Kierkegaard, the Danish thinker of the 19th century, was not exactly the life of the party. He was prone to melancholy, wrote in dense and winding styles, and seemed to view existence as one long wrestling match between despair and hope. But he had a gift for describing the feeling that all of us know, but often struggle to put into words: the dizziness of freedom. Kierkegaard observed that when we stand at the edge of a cliff, we don't just fear falling. We also feel the unsettling awareness that we could jump. That vertigo, that queasy sense of possibility, is what he called anxiety. And for him, anxiety wasn't just an unfortunate side effect of life. It was the very sign that we are human, capable of choosing, of stepping into the unknown. Anxiety is the shadow cast by freedom. We tend to think of anxiety as a flaw, something to be cured or eliminated. Kierkegaard thought differently. He believed that anxiety is woven into the fabric of human existence, a reminder that we are not simply animals following instinct. We are beings who can imagine, who can choose, who can say yes or no, even when neither option comes with guarantees. Anxiety arises because we are confronted with the terrifying openness of possibility. Imagine being handed a blank canvas and told you can paint anything. At first, it sounds wonderful. But then, the dread creeps in. What if you choose the wrong colors? What if you ruin it? What if you never paint at all? That's the anxiety Kierkegaard describes. Every decision, big or small, carries the weight of possibility, and with it, the dizziness of freedom. For Kierkegaard, this wasn't just a psychological quirk. It was an existential truth. He saw human life as a journey through stages. The aesthetic stage, where we pursue pleasure and distraction. The ethical stage, where we take responsibility and make commitments. And finally, the religious stage, where we confront the absurd and make what he called the leap of faith. That leap is not a rational deduction. It's not based on evidence or certainty. It's the courageous act of trusting. Even when there is no ultimate guarantee, the leap of faith doesn't mean turning off your brain or blindly following rules. For Kierkegaard, it meant acknowledging that human reason has limits, that existence contains mysteries we can't fully solve. And in the face of that uncertainty, instead of despair, we leap, we commit. We choose to live as if meaning exists, even when we cannot prove it. Humorously enough, Kierkegaard himself lived a life that demonstrated this tension. He famously broke off his engagement to the woman he loved, Regin Olsen, because he believed he was destined for a solitary path of philosophical and religious reflection. Some have suggested this was noble. Others have suggested it was simply anxious overthinking turned up to 11. Perhaps both are true. In any case, Kierkegaard turned his personal turmoil into a philosophy that still resonates today. We might smile at the drama of it, but haven't we all felt something similar? That trembling before a major choice, when you don't know what the outcome will be, but you know you must leap anyway. Choosing a career, confessing love, moving to a new city, or even pressing send on an email that feels heavier than it should. All of these moments carry that Kierkegaardian anxiety, and all of them remind us that being human is not about certainty, but about the courage to act without it. Kierkegaard even suggested that anxiety can be a teacher. It shows us that we are not locked into one path. It shows us that our lives are open, that our choices matter, that the future is not yet written. In that sense, anxiety is not a flaw to be eradicated, but a companion to be understood. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also the proof that we are free. So, as you settle deeper into the quiet of the night, perhaps you can see anxiety in a new way, not as the enemy, but as the whisper of possibility, not as a sign of weakness, but as a reminder of your freedom. Kierkegaard would tell you that you are standing at the edge of existence, always with choices before you. You cannot know where they lead, but you can leap, and in leaping, you live. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet Paris cafe in the 1940s. The smell of coffee lingers, and the faint sound of jazz seeps in from a nearby record player. Across from you, wearing round glasses and smoking a cigarette with dramatic intensity, is Jean-Paul Sartre. He is about to tell you something that will change the way you think about yourself forever, though possibly ruin your croissant. He leans in, smoke curling through the air, and declares, "You are condemned to be free." Not exactly the kind of phrase you embroider on a pillow. Condemned to be free? At first, it sounds like a contradiction. Freedom is supposed to be a gift, isn't it? The sort of thing people toast champagne over, not sigh heavily about in existential cafes. But Sartre meant something more complicated, and, as usual, a little unsettling. For him, freedom is not just the ability to choose what movie to watch on a Friday night. It's the fundamental condition of our existence. What Sartre meant is this: there is no cosmic script written for you, no divine blueprint that says what you are supposed to be. You simply exist, thrown, as he put it, into the world. Only afterward do you begin to define yourself through your actions. This is the essence of his famous slogan: existence precedes essence. We are not born with an essence like a spoon, whose essence is to scoop soup. Instead, we exist first, like an unshaped lump of clay, and through our choices, we sculpt ourselves. Sounds liberating, right? You get to create yourself, not just follow a script. But here's the rub. That means there's no one else to blame, no cosmic manager to complain to. If your life turns out badly, you cannot blame it on destiny, or the stars, or the IKEA instruction manual of existence. It's your responsibility. And that, Sartre says, is why we are condemned to be free. We didn't ask for this burden. We were simply born into it. And now, we must carry it. You can already feel the weight of it, can't you? Imagine being given absolute creative control over your life, without a rehearsal, without any guidance. No director, no producer, no test audience. Just you, improvising a play in real time. Some nights, that sounds exhilarating. Other nights, especially when you're lying in bed at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, it feels terrifying. Sartre was fascinated by this terror, this dizziness of freedom. He gave it a dramatic name: anguish. It's not the same as fear. Fear is when you hear a strange noise outside and wonder if it's the neighbor's cat or an alien invasion. Anguish is when you realize the decisions you make define not only your own life, but also reflect what you think a human life should be. By choosing, you are, in a sense, saying to the universe, "This is what I believe life should be about." And that's a lot of pressure for one small person. Sipping coffee in a cafe. Sartre illustrated this with his famous example of a student in wartime France. The student comes to Sartre and says, "Should I join the resistance to fight the Nazis, or should I stay home and care for my sick mother?" Both choices are noble. Both have moral weight. But there is no formula, no commandment that can tell him which is correct. Whatever he chooses, he must take responsibility for that choice, knowing he cannot appeal to an outside authority for the right answer. His freedom is his burden. His anguish is real. This is why Sartre insisted that even when we deny our freedom, we are exercising it. He coined the phrase, bad faith, to describe those moments when we pretend we are not free, when we act as if we are just playing roles handed to us, like the waiter who behaves as though he is only a waiter, nothing more, or the lover who insists that they are helpless in their feelings, as if love were a lightning strike rather than a choice. Sartre said this is self-deception, because even in those moments, we are still choosing to play those roles, choosing to deny the depth of our freedom. It might sound heavy, but there is something quietly comforting about it too, because if we are condemned to be free, it means we are never fully trapped. Even in oppressive conditions, even in routines that feel suffocating, Sartre believed there is always a sliver of freedom, the ability to choose our attitude, to decide how we interpret and respond. The room may be small, but the space of choice exists. And so, as you lie here now, perhaps you can feel that strange weight, but also the strange lightness. You are free, even in the smallest of ways. Free to breathe deeply, free to shift your pillow, free to drift off into sleep. There is no script for how you must feel in this moment. There is only your existence and the quiet shaping of your essence, choice by choice, dream by dream. And while Sartre's words may sound like a curse condemned to be free, they are also, in their own way, a lullaby. For if nothing is written for you, then you are not bound by the rigid expectations of others. You are your own author, even if you sometimes scribble in the margins or cross out entire pages. That is the strange, cozy, difficult freedom of being human. And if you feel the dizziness of it now, don't worry. Sartre would say, that's the price of existence. And maybe, as you let yourself slip toward sleep, you can embrace it, not as condemnation, but as possibility. Now, let me tell you a story. A parable, actually. One tucked into Dostoevsky's great novel, The Brothers Karamazov. It is called The Grand Inquisitor, and it feels almost like a dream told in whispers, the kind of story you might hear by candlelight, one that leaves you thinking long after you close your eyes. Picture Spain, centuries ago, in the time of the Inquisition. The streets are narrow, the air is heavy with incense and fear, and one day something extraordinary happens. Jesus returns, not in blazing clouds or trumpets, but quietly, walking through the streets of Seville. He doesn't announce himself. He doesn't demand attention. He simply performs small miracles, healing the blind, comforting the suffering. The people recognize him instantly and gather around in awe. Hope flickers in their hearts, but not everyone is pleased. The Grand Inquisitor, the most powerful figure in the church, sees the commotion. He is an old man, stern and commanding, and he orders Jesus to be arrested. Imagine that. Jesus himself, back on earth, seized by church officials and thrown into a dark cell. And that night, the Grand Inquisitor comes to speak with him. He stands before Jesus and delivers a long, chilling monologue. "Why have you come back?" he asks. "We don't need you here. In fact, your return is dangerous. You see, The inquisitor explains, "People don't actually want freedom. Freedom is too heavy a burden. You gave them freedom," he says. And what did they do with it? They stumbled. They argued. They suffered. Most people cannot bear the weight of choice. They would rather trade their freedom for security, certainty, and bread. The inquisitor recalls the temptations in the desert, when Satan offered Jesus the chance to turn stones into bread, to prove his divinity with miracles, to rule all the kingdoms of the world. Jesus refused, choosing instead to honor freedom, even at the cost of comfort. But the inquisitor disagrees with that choice. He says, "The church has corrected it. We have given people what they really want." He explains, "We give them bread, authority, and miracles. We tell them what to believe. We relieve them of the awful responsibility of freedom." It is a terrifying argument, because it rings uncomfortably true. How often do we long for someone else to tell us what to do, to give us certainty, to protect us from the anguish of choice, to surrender our freedom in exchange for the comfort of obedience? The Grand Inquisitor insists that the masses are happier this way, even if it means living under control. And what does Jesus do in response? He listens silently. He offers no arguments, no rebuttals. And when the inquisitor finishes his speech, Jesus simply stands, walks toward him, and kisses him gently on the lips. The old man trembles. For a moment, his resolve falters, but then he waves his hand, dismisses Jesus, and tells him never to return. This story, tucked like a jewel inside Dostoevsky's novel, speaks to the tension between freedom and security. Freedom is risky, frightening, full of uncertainty. Security is soothing, comforting, easy to cling to. We want both, but often we must choose. The Grand Inquisitor represents the temptation to give up freedom in exchange for certainty. Jesus, in his silent kiss, represents the faith that freedom, even with all its pain, is worth it. Told as a bedtime parable, it is both haunting and gentle. It reminds us that the struggle between freedom and security is not abstract. It lives in each of us. When we follow rules without question, when we prefer comfort over growth, we side with the Inquisitor. When we accept the heavy responsibility of choice, when we embrace freedom, even with trembling, we walk with Jesus. As you drift now, think of the kiss in that dim cell. No speech, no rebuttal, just a gesture of love in the face of authority. It is a reminder that freedom is not easy, but it is profoundly human. And as you let your body sink deeper into the bed, feel the softness of the blankets as a kind of bread, the warmth of your breath as a kind of miracle, and the beating of your heart as the quiet authority that no one else can take from you. In this moment, you hold both freedom and security, balanced in the stillness of sleep. There is a moment, maybe you felt it, when you start thinking about something simple, say, whether you should have tea or hot chocolate, and within 5 minutes, you've somehow arrived at the conclusion that the universe is meaningless and you'll never amount to anything. That, in miniature, is the spirit of existentialist overthinking. These were the philosophers who could take an everyday situation and expand it into an epic drama about the human soul. They were the original anxious spiralers, before Twitter threads, before late-night Google searches that start with, "Do I have a headache? Or is it something worse?" There were the existentialists, sitting in cafes or lonely rooms, scribbling furiously about how freedom is terrifying, and how coffee doesn't actually solve the emptiness of existence. Though, it does help. Take Dostoevsky's underground man, whom we've already met. He could overthink tying his shoelaces. If the lace broke, it wouldn't just be a lace, it would be a metaphor. for the futility of human striving. If it stayed intact, he'd accuse it of mocking him. He couldn't just live life. He had to interrogate it, dissect it, write angry notes to it. He was the friend who, when asked how he was doing, would reply, "Do you mean in the shallow sense, or in the profound cosmic sense?" And then keep talking for 3 hours. Kierkegaard, the Danish champion of anxiety, once described it as the dizziness of freedom. Imagine a man at the edge of a diving board, unable to jump because he's too busy thinking about what jumping represents. That was Kierkegaard's gift. He took what most people thought of as nerves or stage fright and elevated it into a universal condition. Anxiety wasn't a personal flaw, it was proof that you were human. If you weren't overthinking, you weren't alive. Then came Sartre. Sartre couldn't even look at a cafe waiter without spiraling into a meditation on bad faith. The poor waiter thought he was just doing his job, carrying coffee, wiping tables, but to Sartre, the waiter's exaggerated bow and flourish were evidence of self-deception, acting a role instead of embracing his full freedom. Imagine being that waiter and realizing someone is turning your every movement into a philosophical treatise. Sartre was the kind of customer who, instead of leaving a tip, left you existential dread. And then Camus, with his absurd grin, watching all of this like a man at the beach who knows the tide will keep rolling in no matter what you think about it. He wasn't immune to overthinking, but he had a knack for finding humor in it. To him, overthinking was part of the absurd condition. We ask the universe for clarity. It stays silent, and we keep asking anyway. It's a cosmic comedy routine. Imagine a stand-up comedian telling the same joke forever, never getting a laugh, and still going on with the set. That's humanity, said Camus. We can't stop. The existentialists were, in their own way, both tragic and hilarious. They worried, agonized, dissected every choice, but in doing so, they gave voice to what so many people quietly feel. The late-night thoughts, the spirals that start with, "What if?" and end with, "What does it all mean?" They took that comedy of overthinking and wrote it into history, and it is funny when you soften the edges. Imagine Kierkegaard, pacing, wondering if he should write a book or confess his love, wringing his hands, sighing dramatically into the Copenhagen air. Imagine Sartre at a party, cornering someone near the punch bowl to explain how their small talk about the weather is actually an act of bad faith. Imagine Dostoevsky at the casino, losing all his money, and then deciding this too was proof of freedom. And Camus, sun-tanned and half-smiling, reminding them all that one day they'll be gone. So, maybe just enjoy the punch. Their legacy reminds us that overthinking, while exhausting, is also deeply human. To think too much is to care too much, to feel the weight of choice, to wrestle with meaning. They turned anxious, spiraling into philosophy. They were the OG anxious overthinkers. Yes, but they also gave us permission to laugh at ourselves when we're lying awake at night, rehashing conversations from 10 years ago. If it feels ridiculous, it's because it island. And because it's ridiculous, it's also a little bit beautiful. So, as you lie here now, if your mind wants to wander in loops, let it. You're in good company. The existentialists would say that your overthinking is not a flaw, it's the echo of freedom, the comedy of being human. And maybe, if you smile at it gently, it will settle down into dreams. When Camus wrote about Sisyphus pushing his eternal boulder, he wasn't really talking about ancient Greece. He was talking about you and me, and all the little tasks we do every day that never stay done. Life, it turns out, is full of boulders. And while none of us have Olympian calves like Sisyphus probably did, we all have moments when we're rolling stones uphill just to watch them roll down again. Consider laundry. No matter how many socks you fold, there will always be more. And one sock will always vanish, as if it decided to pursue its own freedom. Or dishes. You scrub the plates. You put them away. You feel triumphant for about 7 minutes, and then you walk back into the kitchen to find someone has already left a cup in the sink, or emails. Every time you empty your inbox, you can practically hear the universe chuckling. Oh, sweet child, just wait. Camus would say these are our modern boulders. The repetition, the futility, the endless cycles. And yet, he would also say that we can meet them with dignity. We can become absurd heroes in small, ordinary ways. Not by pretending the tasks will end, but by embracing them as part of the rhythm of being alive. The point isn't to get the boulder to the top once and for all. It's to keep pushing, to find meaning in the act itself. Think of the parent who packs school lunches every morning. Even though the kids will complain about the carrot sticks, think of the nurse who changes bandages again and again, knowing another patient will arrive tomorrow. Think of the commuter who boards the same train, day after day, finding small moments of peace in the scenery out the window. These are all Sisyphus moments. Ordinary, repetitive, often thankless. And yet, in them, there can be quiet heroism. The beauty of Camus' idea is that you don't have to change the world to be an absurd hero. You just have to face your life honestly, without illusions, and still keep going. To laugh at the futility while you're in the middle of it. To smile at the absurdity of sweeping the floor even as dust settles back down. To know the stone will roll back, and to push anyway. Sometimes, absurd heroism shows up in even smaller moments. The person who waters their houseplant faithfully, even though it never seems to thrive. The student who studies, knowing the test will lead only to another test. The jogger who runs the same route, sweating the same sweat. Not because it will change the cosmos, but because it's simply what they've chosen. These tiny rituals, these daily repetitions, are all part of what it means to live without appeal, as Camus put it. To say, I know the universe is silent, but I will answer with my action. And there's humor in it, too. Because once you start seeing life this way, everything looks a little like a Sisyphus moment. Imagine Camus watching someone queue up at the DMV, standing in line for hours, paperwork in hand, knowing that the system is labyrinthine and absurd, but still waiting patiently. That's a modern, absurd hero. Or someone assembling IKEA furniture, following incomprehensible instructions, ending up with 3 extra screws and a shelf that wobbles, but still calling it done. That's absurd heroism too. These little boulders connect us to one another. We all share them. Nobody escapes dishes, or laundry, or waiting rooms, or the repetitive cycles of work. And in that shared futility, there's a kind of solidarity. We're all absurd heroes together, pushing our stones, sometimes grumbling, sometimes laughing, sometimes singing while we do it. Camus believed that the way to face these moments is not with despair but with defiance. Not with the hope that one day the boulder will magically stay put, but with the resolve to say, I know it will roll down, and I choose to push it again anyway. In that choice, in that acceptance, we find our freedom. So, as you lie here now, think of your own little boulders. Maybe they're waiting for you tomorrow. The emails, the laundry, the errands. Maybe you've already pushed them today, and they've rolled back down while you weren't looking. Rather than dread them, imagine yourself as Sisyphus, calm, steady, smiling faintly as you lean into the effort. You don't have to love the boulder, but you can love the fact that you're alive enough to push it. And in that simple thought, you might find something strangely comforting. That being human means being absurd, and that being absurd means being alive. Tomorrow, the stone will be there, but tonight, you can rest. There is a quiet moment in Dostoevsky's great novel, The Brothers Karamazov, when Ivan, the skeptical brother, speaks to Alyosha, the faithful one. The conversation does not feel like a lofty lecture. It feels like someone late at night, troubled, unable to sleep, speaking from the raw edge of their soul. And what he speaks about is suffering the kind that feels unbearable, unredeemable, impossible to justify. Not the suffering of villains getting what they deserve, but the suffering of the innocent, especially children. That, Dostoevsky says, is the hardest thing for the human heart to accept. Imagine it. Ivan tells Alyosha stories of cruelty that he has read in the papers, or perhaps heard whispered on the streets. Stories of children beaten by their parents, of a little girl locked in an outhouse overnight, freezing, crying out in the dark. Stories of soldiers tossing infants into the air and catching them on bayonets. He tells these stories not because he wants to sensationalize them, but because he wants to press the question as far as it can go. How can a loving God allow this? What sort of cosmic justice requires the tears of children? It's one thing, Ivan says, to imagine our suffering being redeemed in some grand narrative of eternity. Adults, perhaps, can consent to the bargain of pain exchanged for growth. But children? They have no chance to choose. Their suffering is pure injustice. And Ivan declares that if the price of harmony, the price of eternal joy, is even one child's tear, he refuses the ticket. He will not accept that kind of world, that kind of bargain. Now, you can feel the heaviness of that. It is not just theology. It is heartbreak put into words. Dostoevsky himself knew something of this sorrow. He buried children of his own. He lived through prison camps, through illness, through poverty. He saw cruelty up close, not as an abstraction, but as daily reality. And so when Ivan raises his rebellion against suffering, it is Dostoevsky himself crying out. And yet, even in this darkness, there is a softness in how he writes. He doesn't hurry to give easy answers. He doesn't sweep the problem under the rug. He allows the question to sit with us, to ache, to weigh on us. Because sometimes the most human thing is not to solve a mystery but to share the pain of it. Dostoevsky slows us down, like a lullaby, guiding us not toward resolution, but toward compassion. In the novel, Alyosha listens to Ivan with tears in his eyes. He does not try to out-argue him. He doesn't launch into complicated theology. He simply feels the weight of what Ivan is saying, and his answer is not an explanation, but a gesture of love. This is where Dostoevsky offers something subtle. The problem of suffering, especially innocent suffering, may not be solved by logic. It may only be met by love, by presence, by the willingness to hold another's pain. And so we find ourselves, centuries later, still haunted by Dostoevsky's question. We see suffering in the world and wonder why. We see tragedies that seem meaningless, unfair, and devastating. And when we lie awake at night, our own version of Ivan's rebellion may stir inside us. Why must it be like this? Perhaps Dostoevsky would tell us that asking the question is part of being human. That to feel outrage at innocent suffering is not a flaw, but a sign of conscience, of a heart still alive. That the rebellion of Ivan is necessary, even holy, because it keeps us from growing numb to cruelty. The problem of suffering may never be fully explained, but in refusing to ignore it, we show our humanity. And maybe, just maybe, Dostoevsky would also remind us that even though suffering cannot always be redeemed by reason, it can sometimes be softened by compassion. A kind word, a hand held, a tear shared. These don't erase the pain, but they remind us that we are not alone in it. And that, perhaps, is why Alyosha responds, not with arguments, but with love. So, as you rest now, listening, you might think of your own encounters with suffering, the heartbreaks you've witnessed, the unfairness you've carried. Let them drift into the quiet of the night. You don't have to solve them. You don't have to justify them. Like Dostoevsky, you can simply acknowledge them, hold them gently, and let compassion rise from that acknowledgement. For sometimes, the most human thing is not to explain but to love, even in the face of unanswered questions. And in that quiet acceptance, you may find yourself softening, drifting, carried by the knowledge that Dostoevsky too lay awake with these same questions, and that you are not alone in wondering. Albert Camus, who always seemed to glow with the light of the Mediterranean sun, looked at the same problem Dostoevsky wrestled with and came to his own startling conclusion. He did not try to explain suffering by appealing to God or by imagining some future redemption. Instead, he called us to rebellion, not the kind with barricades and muskets, but a deeper, existential rebellion. A rebellion against despair, against false consolations, against the temptation to look away from the absurd. For Camus, the absurd was that mismatch we've spoken of before, the gap between our hunger for meaning and the universe's silence. Most people, he said, try to escape that silence in one of two ways. They either take a leap into religion, finding comfort in promises of eternity, or they give up altogether, surrendering to despair. Camus rejected both. He said no to suicide, no to resignation, and no to illusions of cosmic justice. His rebellion was to live fully, to embrace life as it is, without appeals to higher meaning. This may sound bleak, but in Camus' writing it becomes strangely luminous. To rebel is to refuse the lie that life is meaningless because it has no higher purpose. To rebel is to affirm that life matters because we are here, breathing, choosing, loving, even in the face of silence. The rebellion is not about changing the universe. It is about refusing to bow to its indifference. Camus imagined rebellion in both solitary and collective forms. Alone, it might look like an individual choosing to live with honesty, to savor the morning light, to create art, to love fully, even knowing it will all end. Together, rebellion takes the form of solidarity, people, uniting not because they have solved the mystery of existence, but because they face it side by side. The plague does not disappear, but in fighting it together, people create meaning. And here, humor seeps in. Camus, with his wry smile, invites us to laugh at the absurdity of our condition. We keep asking the universe for answers, like customers at a bakery demanding bread, and the universe just shrugs. And yet, instead of walking away hungry, we invent recipes of our own. We bake our own bread, share it with one another, and smile at the silliness of the situation. That, to Camus, is rebellion. The refusal to starve spiritually, even when the universe refuses to feed us. It's not an easy path. To live without false hope means you cannot rely on comforting illusions. It means facing death squarely, knowing it is the end. It means facing injustice without believing it will be magically corrected in some cosmic accounting. But Camus insists this is where true dignity lies. To stare reality in the face and still say yes to life is the highest form of courage. Think of Sisyphus, whom Camus crowned as the absurd hero. His stone always rolls back down, but he does not despair. He rebels against the futility by embracing it, by finding joy in the pushing. So too, says Camus, can we live fully in a world that refuses to justify itself. We can work, love, create, and laugh, even while knowing the silence. And perhaps, in this, there is a lesson for sleepless nights. When the silence of the universe feels too loud, when the questions about suffering and meaning weigh heavily, Camus would whisper, "Rebel, not with violence, not with illusions, but with life. Get up in the morning and make your coffee. Write your poem. Call your friend. Smile at the absurdity." These small acts, repeated, are the quiet rebellion that makes life worth living. So as you settle deeper now, into the softness of your bed, let Camus' rebellion comfort you. You don't need to solve the mystery of existence tonight. You don't need to cling to false promises or despair over unanswered questions. You can simply breathe, live, and in doing so, rebel against nothingness. For in that rebellion, Camus says, is our freedom, our dignity, and our joy. It is late evening in Paris. The streets glisten faintly from an afternoon rain, and the yellow glow of street lamps reflects on wet cobblestones. You push open the creaky door of a cafe and step inside. The air is thick with cigarette smoke, the kind that clings to your clothes and makes you smell like a philosopher, whether you wanted to or not. There's chatter in French, the clinking of glasses, and a particular aroma that fills every corner, the smell of coffee, dark and strong, served in cups so tiny they look like they were made for dolls, but powerful enough to keep you awake through hours of spiraling thought. And here, at one of these crowded wooden tables, are the existentialists. Sartre is scribbling furiously in a notebook, while insisting to anyone who will listen that existence precedes essence. Simone de Beauvoir sits nearby, sharp-eyed, her brilliance quiet but unmistakable, occasionally reminding Sartre that she too has thoughts worth writing down. Though history for too long pretended otherwise, Camus is there as well, not quite fitting in, his Algerian sunlit aura contrasting with the Parisian gloom. He drinks his coffee like it's wine, savoring it slowly, while quietly judging everyone for being too serious. Coffee was not just a drink to these thinkers. It was fuel. It was ritual. It was the unofficial sponsor of existentialism. Without coffee, the long nights of conversation, the marathon writing sessions, the world-changing ideas might have fizzled into yawns. You cannot proclaim the crushing weight of freedom and the absurdity of life while nodding off at the table. Coffee kept their eyes open, their pens moving, their voices raised in smoke-filled rooms. Think about it. Existentialism was a philosophy of sleepless nights. It was born in the hours after midnight, when the city quieted and questions about meaning grew louder. The cafes were not just social spaces, they were laboratories of thought. Unlike the silence of churches or the solemnity of universities, cafes welcomed noise, interruptions, laughter, and argument. They gave the existentialists a stage to perform their philosophy in real time, testing ideas, like comedians, testing jokes on a live audience. There is something inherently comic about imagining Sartre, jittering from his 10th espresso, pacing around the cafe, explaining that human beings are condemned to be free while a waitress rolls her eyes because he still hasn't paid the bill. Or Camus, smirking into his coffee cup, muttering that all of this is absurd anyway, while the barman wonders why these strange intellectuals never just order tea and go home. The caffeine buzz made their philosophies urgent, Life might be meaningless, but there was another pot brewing in the corner, and the night was still young. Coffee also served as a symbol of modernity. Unlike wine, which lulled people into comfort, coffee sharpened the mind, forced wakefulness, made the night stretch longer than nature intended. Philosophers had been drinking wine for centuries, but coffee was something new, something that belonged to bustling cities and restless minds. In the 17th and 18th centuries, coffee houses had already earned the reputation of being dangerous breeding grounds for ideas. Politicians feared them. Censors monitored them. Revolutions were whispered over cups of dark liquid. By the time existentialism bloomed, coffee had become inseparable from the idea of thinking outside boundaries. And so, in Paris, existentialism found its perfect setting. The café was both public and private, noisy and intimate. It allowed philosophers to watch the flow of human life while simultaneously escaping it. It gave them endless fuel for observation. Lovers arguing at the next table, lonely men staring into their cups, groups laughing too loudly. Every corner was a miniature drama, a confirmation of the themes they wrote about: freedom, absurdity, alienation, hope, despair. Simone de Beauvoir, in particular, found the café essential. For her, it was a place where she could carve out a life beyond traditional roles imposed on women. She and Sartre practically lived in these spaces, turning tables into offices, libraries, and battlefields of the mind. The café gave her room to write The Second Sex, a book that would redefine how we think about women, freedom, and identity. Without the café's hum, without its coffee and its openness, perhaps such work might have taken a different form or never arrived at all. And here's a thought to lull you toward rest. Coffee didn't just keep them awake, it gave them company. There is a loneliness to staring into the abyss, but the café made it communal. It transformed solitary despair into shared dialogue. You could argue passionately about whether God exists, slam your hand on the table, spill your espresso, and then laugh with your friends about how ridiculous it all was. Philosophy became less about ivory towers and more about clinking cups. So, as you sink into your pillow now, picture that smoky Parisian café, the chatter fading into background hum, the clink of cups like a lullaby, the philosophers animated but strangely comforting in their intensity, the questions they asked about meaning, about freedom, about absurdity, still echo in us. And maybe, if you've ever stared into a cup of coffee late at night, wondering about your life, you've already shared in that tradition. Perhaps your kitchen table was, for a moment, its own Paris café, and your thoughts were part of the same restless current that once flowed through Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Camus. The night stretches on, the ideas flow, the coffee cools in the cup, and the hum of the café lulls you not into despair, but into a kind of warmth. Because even in the face of absurdity, the shared ritual of sipping coffee together is enough to keep the night alive. Love is perhaps the most absurd thing of all. Think about it. In a universe that offers no ultimate meaning, no guaranteed answers, people still look at each other and say, "You, out of all the billions of people who have ever existed, I choose you." And then they spend decades together, arguing over what to eat for dinner. It is magnificent and ridiculous at the same time. And that is exactly why existentialists had so much to say about it. For Kierkegaard, love was deeply tied to faith. He saw it as a leap, not just into the arms of another person, but into the unknown. You can never fully know the heart of another human being, and yet love requires you to trust, to risk, to give yourself anyway. It's terrifying, but also beautiful. To him, true love was not about convenience or pleasure alone. It was about the willingness to risk despair for the sake of something greater. Dostoevsky, ever the dramatist, portrayed love as a battlefield of freedom and suffering. His characters love in extremes. They love passionately, destructively, redemptively. Love, for Dostoevsky, was proof of the human capacity for both cruelty and compassion. In The Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha embodies a love rooted in compassion, while others embody love warped into jealousy, violence, and despair. For him, love was not a neat story, but a storm that revealed the deepest truths about who we are. Sartre, unsurprisingly, took a bleaker view. In his eyes, love often turned into a struggle of freedom versus control. He argued that to love someone is, in part, to want to possess them, to be the center of their world. And yet, because they too are free beings, they cannot be possessed. This creates tension. You want their devotion, but you cannot own their freedom. Sartre wrote that this tension often turns love into a kind of hell, two people locked in a dance of wanting and resisting. Imagine trying to hug smoke. The tighter you grasp, the more it slips away. That was Sartre's idea of romance. Not exactly Hallmark card material. Camus, however, found a gentler, sunnier way to see it. For him, love was another form of rebellion. If life is absurd, if the universe offers no ultimate validation, then to love someone anyway is to declare, I will create meaning here, between us. Love, in Camus' view, is not guaranteed, not eternal, not even always rational, but it is real, and it is enough. To sit across from someone, to share laughter, to share mornings and evenings, is to defy the silence of the universe together. Two people saying yes, in a world that does not care whether they say it. There's a kind of comedy in this. Lovers spend so much time arguing about small things, the thermostat, the toothpaste cap, the best way to stack the dishwasher, while philosophers like Sartre are in the background muttering, yes. But underneath these arguments lies the eternal struggle of freedom. And yet, isn't that funny and true? Love is made of small acts, cooking together, sending texts, forgiving, laughing. These little absurd rituals add up to something larger than reason. And maybe that is the existentialist insight. Love is absurd, but so are we. We cannot demand that it makes sense. We can only embrace it. We can leap like Kierkegaard, suffer and redeem like Dostoevsky, wrestle with freedom like Sartre, or bask in the rebellion like Camus. But in each case, to love is to live authentically. So tonight, as you rest, think of love not as something you must solve, but as something you can simply live. Whether it is romantic love, or the love of friends, or the quiet care of family, each is an act of meaning-making in a world that refuses to provide it. Each is a way of saying, the universe may be silent, but we are not. And in that recognition, love becomes a lullaby, not perfect, not eternal, but enough to quiet the night, enough to remind you, as you drift toward dreams, that absurd though it may be, love is still one of the most profoundly human things we can do. Imagine you are standing in front of a bakery shelf, and before you are 10 different kinds of bread: rye, sourdough, multigrain, baguette, ciabatta, pumpernickel, focaccia, something with seeds, something with olives, and one that just says artisan, because nobody really knows what it means, but it costs extra. You're hungry, but suddenly you're also anxious. Which one should you pick? What if you pick the wrong one? What if the bread you choose today says something profound about the kind of person you are? This, in miniature, is the psychology of choice. Freedom is wonderful until you actually have to use it. Then it becomes complicated, heavy, even a little absurd. The existentialists were fascinated by this tension. They knew that freedom was the mark of being human, the crown jewel of our consciousness. And yet they also knew that freedom could weigh us down, that it could paralyze us, that it could make us long for someone else to choose on our behalf. Sartre, who could barely walk into a cafe without turning the waiter into a case study, argued that freedom is absolute. You cannot escape it. Even refusing to choose is still a choice. He gave us that famous line, "We are condemned to be free." The word condemned is important. It signals that this isn't just a delightful opportunity. It's also a burden, a sentence we didn't ask for, but must serve. Think of a child in a candy store told, "Pick anything you like." At first, the child is ecstatic. All the sweets are available. But then, the anxiety sets in. If they pick the chocolate bar, they miss out on the gummy bears. If they choose the gummy bears, they lose the lollipop. And in the end, the freedom that was supposed to make them happy becomes a torment. Adults aren't much different. We just worry about mortgages instead of marshmallows. Kierkegaard captured this feeling when he called anxiety the dizziness of freedom. Standing at the edge of choice feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. We wobble, we look down. We realize that we could fall, or we could jump. And the realization itself makes us dizzy. That dizziness is what haunts us when we think about our lives, our careers, our relationships. What if we choose wrong? What if we waste our time? What if? What if? What if? Psychologically, freedom demands responsibility. That's what makes it heavy. If you believe destiny has written your story, then you can relax. You're just following a script. But if you accept, as the existentialists insisted, that no script exists, then every action is yours alone. Every yes, every no, every hesitation becomes part of who you are. You can no longer say, "Well, fate made me do it." You have to say, "I made me do it." That is liberating, but it is also terrifying. The burden of choice shows up in daily life more than we realize. Think of scrolling endlessly through a streaming service, unable to pick a movie because there are too many options. This tiny crisis is a reflection of the larger existential one. Infinite possibilities, finite time, and the knowledge that every choice excludes others. You cannot watch every film. You cannot live every life. You cannot become every version of yourself. Freedom means saying yes, but it also means saying no to countless other paths. And yet, without freedom, we would not be fully human. Dostoevsky knew this intimately. He argued that even when freedom led us to ruin, we cherished it more than happiness. The underground man sabotaged himself precisely to prove he was not a machine, not bound to rational outcomes. Better to be miserable by choice than happy by programming. That stubborn insistence, that choice itself is sacred, is what gives freedom its dignity, even when it feels unbearable. So freedom is both a gift and a burden. It gives us creativity, individuality, and authenticity. It allows us to shape our lives in ways no algorithm could predict. But it also leaves us exposed, anxious, and uncertain. And here, perhaps, is where the existentialists offered comfort. The very struggle with choice is proof of our humanity. To wrestle with decisions, to feel the weight of freedom, is not a flaw. It is what makes us alive. As you lie here tonight, maybe you feel echoes of this weight. Choices past, choices future, decisions you haven't made yet hovering in your mind. Let them soften. You don't need to decide everything right now. The freedom will still be there tomorrow. Tonight, you can let go of the dizziness, knowing that the very ability to feel it means you are part of the strange, remarkable club of beings who are free. And maybe, in the quiet of the night, freedom can feel less like a burden and more like a gentle gift, the space to dream, to imagine, to drift. Now imagine again those smoky cafes where Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Camus gathered. The coffee is strong, the conversation's passionate, but outside those cozy walls, the world is on fire. Europe has been ripped apart by wars, dictatorships, and revolutions. Totalitarian regimes rise and fall, each promising salvation, each demanding obedience. For the existentialists, these weren't just political events. They were existential threats. Because at their core, totalitarian systems try to erase freedom. And freedom, to the existentialists, is the very essence of being human. What is ideology, after all? It is a story that claims to explain everything. A neat package of answers. A promise that if you just believe, if you just obey, you won't have to feel the burden of freedom anymore. Fascism, communism, religious extremism, they each offered a grand narrative. Follow the leader. Trust the plan. Sacrifice your individuality for the collective. And in return, you would be relieved of uncertainty, of anguish, of the dizziness of choice. To the existentialists, this was deeply seductive and deeply dangerous. Seductive, because who doesn't long for certainty? Who doesn't want someone else to carry the heavy backpack of responsibility? But dangerous, because in giving up your freedom for security, you surrender what makes you human. You become, in Sartre's language, a being in bad faith, living as if you are not free, pretending that the story absolves you of choice. Dostoevsky had already warned of this in The Grand Inquisitor. Remember that old man who told Jesus people preferred bread and order over freedom? That story haunted existentialists because they saw it playing out in real time. The 20th century was full of inquisitors wearing different uniforms, each insisting they had the answers, each demanding obedience. The camps, the gulags, the secret police, all were built on the same idea: that individuals don't matter, that freedom is too messy, that the grand ideology matters more than the human soul. Camus, especially, was horrified by this. He argued in The Rebel that ideologies begin with noble causes, but quickly justify atrocities in the name of future utopias. They say, yes, people will suffer now, but it will be worth it when the perfect society arrives. Camus rejected this trade. He insisted that the present human being, with their dignity and suffering, matters more than any imagined paradise. To sacrifice actual lives for abstract ideals was, to him, the ultimate betrayal. Sartre, for his part, wrestled with ideology in more complicated ways. He flirted with Marxism, believing it might offer liberation for the oppressed, but even he eventually recognized the danger of turning freedom into dogma. Ideology freezes the fluidity of human existence, locking us into categories: friend or enemy, loyalist or traitor, believer or heretic. It simplifies reality so much that it strangles it. The existentialists saw that ideology was not just political, it was psychological. It tempted us to escape anguish by outsourcing our choices. It promised relief from the dizziness of freedom. But in accepting that relief, we give up what makes us most alive. Our ability to choose, to question, to rebel against even the most comforting lies. And yet, they also knew that people would keep falling into this trap, because it is so very human to want certainty. Kierkegaard had already pointed out how tempting it was to leap into faith, to quiet the anxiety of existence by surrendering to a higher power. The existentialists after him widened that insight. It's not only religion that tempts us, but ideology of every kind. Any system that says, "Don't worry, we've got it all figured out," is, in its way, a grand inquisitor. So, what is the alternative? Camus offered rebellion, not revolution with its dogmas and gulags, but rebellion as a stance, a refusal to accept injustice, but also a refusal to claim total answers, a middle path, fighting oppression without becoming an oppressor, living without illusions, but also without surrender. Sartre spoke of authenticity, living with full awareness of your freedom, even when it is heavy, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. As you rest tonight, you might hear in this a gentle reminder. The world is full of stories, ideologies, promises of certainty. Some may be helpful, but none can carry the burden of your existence for you. That is yours alone. And while that may feel heavy, it is also precious. It means you remain free, even when the world tries to take that freedom away. It means you can choose, even quietly, even here, even now, and in this soft recognition. Perhaps you can let go of the noise of the world's dogmas. You don't need to solve politics tonight. You don't need to answer ideology with ideology. You can simply breathe into your own freedom, the small space of choice that is always yours. And as you close your eyes, you can drift into sleep, not with false hope, not with fear, but with the calm assurance that even in the face of ideology, the human spirit remains free. Imagine you are standing alone in the middle of a vast square. The air is heavy with silence, the kind that makes your footsteps echo back to you. Around you are buildings, stern and imposing, but the square itself feels strangely empty. You feel small, vulnerable, and maybe even a little absurd. And then, out of the corner of your eye, you notice someone else. They too are standing in the square, their shoulders tense, their expression uncertain. They look at you, and in that glance you both recognize something. Neither of you consented to the absurdity of the world, but here you are anyway, alive in it. This is where Camus' idea of rebellion begins to shift. At first, it seems personal. One human being refusing despair, choosing to live honestly without illusions. But rebellion doesn't stay solitary. It radiates. Because when one person says no to the silence of the universe, they are not only rejecting meaninglessness for themselves, they are affirming the dignity of all people who share the same condition. And from that, something extraordinary happens. Solidarity. Camus describes rebellion as the moment when a human being stands up and says, "This is intolerable." Whether it's the injustice of oppression, the cruelty of violence, or the emptiness of a meaningless narrative, rebellion begins in refusal. But notice what follows immediately. The rebel says, "This is intolerable for me," and by implication, it must also be intolerable for you. Rebellion reveals not just individuality, but universality. By asserting our own dignity, we affirm the dignity of others. It is here that community begins. In saying no, we also say yes. We say yes to the value of the human experience. Yes to solidarity. Yes to life shared rather than life endured alone. The rebel does not close themselves off. They open a space for others to join. And in that space, community forms. Think of historical examples. The French resistance in the Second World War, for instance. On the surface, it was a group of isolated individuals risking everything. But in their acts of refusal, printing newspapers, sheltering the hunted, sabotaging the machinery of oppression, they created a web of solidarity that stretched across villages, across cities, across lives. Their rebellion was contagious. It linked them, even when they never met. On a smaller scale, consider the quiet acts of rebellion we engage in every day. The worker who says, "I deserve to be treated fairly." The friend who says, "I will not let you suffer alone." The stranger who stands up for someone else on the bus, or in a classroom, or in a courtroom. Each act may begin with an individual, but each creates ripples of connection. You may not know it, but when you say no to injustice, you are also saying yes to community. There is comfort here, soft as a blanket, because the absurd often makes us feel isolated. We lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking no one else feels this weight. No one else sees the silence. But then we discover through literature, through friendship, through rebellion, that others have felt it too. Dostoevsky felt it. Kierkegaard felt it. Sartre, Camus, and countless unnamed people across history have felt it. And in recognizing this, we are less alone. It's almost paradoxical. The very thing that seems to separate us, the silence of the universe, turns out to unite us. We are all listeners to the same silence. And in our shared refusal to let that silence dictate despair, we find one another. That is solidarity. Not a forced unity, not an ideology that demands conformity, but a bond born of shared vulnerability and shared defiance. And this bond is not loud. It doesn't need to shout. It is more like a murmur, a hand reached across the table, a glance of recognition between strangers. Rebellion leads not to chaos, but to quiet community. It tells us, you don't have to carry the boulder alone. There are others who will push beside you. As you rest now, feel that comfort. The comfort of knowing that your questions, your struggles, your rebellions are not isolated. Others share them. Others have whispered the same no into the same silence, and in doing so, created a chorus of quiet yes. You are not alone in the square. The community is already here, around you, soft and unseen, holding you in solidarity. Now let us drift to two landscapes, as different as night and day, yet both the birthplaces of philosophies that still haunt us. On one side, the Mediterranean Sunday golden light stretching across the sea, warm breezes carrying the smell of salt and oranges, laughter echoing in the streets. On the other, the Russian winter, snow endless and silent, streets cloaked in gray, the air sharp with frost, people huddling in coats as the wind cuts through like a blade. Albert Camus belonged to the Sunday-born in Algeria. He grew up under skies so bright, they seemed to make everything sharper, clearer. He was drawn to light, to the sea, to the rhythm of football matches on dusty fields. His philosophy carried that brightness. Even when he spoke of absurdity, he infused it with warmth. Life, he said, may be meaningless, but that doesn't mean it cannot be beautiful. The sunlight on your face, the laughter of friends, the taste of coffee, these are enough. He found rebellion not in despair, but in joy, in embracing the moments given to us. Dostoevsky, by contrast, belonged to snow. He lived in a Russia of prisons, poverty, and icy winds. He was arrested, sentenced to death, and reprieved only at the last moment, a trauma that never left him. His writing is full of shadows, confessions, basements, and men tormented by conscience. He believed suffering was the crucible of the human soul. He did not flee from the cold, he stood in it, shivering, insisting that it revealed the truth of our condition. For Dostoevsky, salvation was found not in the warmth of sunlight, but in the endurance of winter. And so we have a contrast. Camus, with his sunny, absurd hero, smiling as he pushes the boulder under a clear blue sky. Dostoevsky, with his underground man, muttering in the frost, wrapped in his misery, yet fiercely protecting his freedom. Both men are existentialists in their own way, both staring into the silence of the universe. But one chooses brightness, the other embraces gloom. Which is right? Perhaps both. For sometimes, life feels Mediterranean alive, sparkling, filled with small joys that need no cosmic justification. And sometimes life feels Russian, heavy, bleak, filled with suffering that seems to stretch endlessly. The existentialists remind us that both are real. Both are part of the human condition. To live fully is to feel both the sun and the snow. Sometimes in the same day. There's humor here, too. Imagine Camus and Dostoevsky at a dinner party. Camus insists, "We must imagine Sisyphus happy." Dostoevsky scowls into his vodka and mutters, "We must imagine him miserable, because that's the truth." Camus gestures toward the window, where the sun is setting in golden light. Dostoevsky points at the radiator, which isn't working properly, and declares that this proves the futility of life. They argue, but in their own way, they complete each other. One brings the brightness that makes endurance possible. The other brings the seriousness that keeps joy from becoming shallow. As you listen now, let the contrast wash over you. Feel the warmth of the Mediterranean sun, gentle waves, glowing light, an invitation to rest in the present moment. Then feel the hush of Russian snow, the quiet stillness, the resilience of enduring the cold, the beauty of a landscape stripped bare. Both can be lullabies. One soothes you with warmth, the other with stillness. Camus teaches us to laugh in the face of absurdity, to sip our coffee slowly, to savor the sunlight. Dostoevsky teaches us to endure the nights of suffering, to confront the questions that ache, to find compassion in shared pain. Together, they show us the full spectrum of being alive. And as you drift now, you don't need to choose between them. You can carry both, the brightness of Camus and the gravity of Dostoevsky, the warmth of the Mediterranean and the chill of Russian snow. They are contrasts, but also complements two sides of the same human mystery, whispering you towards sleep. There is a certain hush that falls when you step outside late at night. The traffic has slowed, the shops are closed, and the sky above stretches in a wide, dark silence. If you listen carefully, you might hear the soft hum of the earth itself wind in the trees, the faint chirp of a restless bird, or the sound of your own breath mingling with the night. In that stillness, you realize the universe is not whispering any secrets to you. It isn't plotting your destiny or scribbling your fate on some cosmic chalkboard. It is simply silent. At first, that silence can feel unsettling. We want answers. We want the world to turn toward us and say, "Here is your purpose. Here is your reason. Here is why you exist." But the universe doesn't do that. It doesn't speak back. And so we are left with the vast, star-filled hush that some people call nothingness. To the existentialists, that nothingness was not a void to fear, but a reality to accept. And in accepting it, they discovered something surprising: peace. Camus, Sartre, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, they all felt the sting of the silence in different ways. Sartre famously described life as a kind of nausea, the raw fact of existence pressing in on us without explanation. Camus described the absurd, the gap between our hunger for meaning and the universe's indifference. Dostoevsky wrestled with the heartbreak of suffering in a world where answers seemed elusive. Kierkegaard trembled before the uncertainty of faith. Each, in their own language, admitted the same thing. There is no cosmic script handed to us. But here's the secret gift. If no script exists, then no script binds you. If the universe offers no ready-made meaning, then you are free to create your own. The silence is not a punishment. It is an open space, like a blank canvas, waiting for whatever brushstrokes you choose to add. Think of how exhausting it would be if the universe did have a grand plan for you, carved in stone somewhere. You would have to spend your entire life worrying whether you were following it correctly. Did you take the right job? Did you marry the right person? Did you floss enough? Imagine the cosmic guilt trips. Instead, the universe shrugs and says nothing, which means you can laugh, you can try, you can fail, you can love, you can nap in the middle of the afternoon, and no divine accountant is tallying points. This absence of cosmic meaning is, in its way, a relief. It means there is no destiny you can ruin, no eternal scoreboard you can lose. Your life is not a test you might fail, but an open improvisation. You get to choose the melody, and if you hit a few wrong notes along the way, that's part of the music. The silence of the universe is the soft background against which your own song can play. And here's where the lullaby begins. Imagine nothingness, not as a frightening void, but as a quiet cradle. The absence of answers is also the absence of judgment. The stars do not scold you. The galaxies do not demand. The silence is vast and unbroken, and in that space you are free to rest. Like a baby rocked by the rhythm of breath, you can let yourself be carried by the nothingness, knowing that you do not have to solve the riddle of existence tonight. There is even humor in this realization. We often act as though the universe owes us explanations, as if somewhere out there is a cosmic customer service department with a very long hold time. Imagine dialing it. Press 1 to ask about your purpose. Press 2 to complain about suffering. Press 3 to request a refund for your 20s. But of course, nobody answers. And while at first that feels rude, eventually it becomes funny. If no one is answering, then we don't have to wait on hold. We can hang up and go live. Nothingness can also feel peaceful because it puts our worries in perspective. The things that keep us awake at night, the embarrassing comment we made at lunch, the emails left unanswered, the grand plans not yet achieved, none of these are permanent. In the silence of the cosmos, they dissolve. This isn't to say they don't matter at all. They matter to us, and that's enough. But they are not eternal. They are not cosmic disasters. They are ripples on a pond, gentle and passing. And isn't that comforting? To know that we are not carrying the weight of eternity, only the weight of our own lives. To know that our mistakes are small in the grand sweep of time. The silence of the universe makes room for forgiveness, for letting go, for peace. As you lie here now, listening, let that silence enfold you. Let the absence of cosmic meaning be your lullaby. You don't have to wrestle with destiny tonight. You don't have to solve the mysteries of suffering or decode the riddle of existence. You can simply breathe, rest, and drift. The universe is silent, but in that silence, you can find calm. For the quiet of nothingness is not emptiness, it is space, vast and gentle, waiting to cradle you into sleep. And now, we have traveled a long way together. Through Dostoevsky's haunted prisons and Kierkegaard's anxious leaps, through Sartre's smoky cafes and Camus' sunlit absurdity. We have wrestled with freedom, laughed at overthinking, rolled boulders up hills, and sat quietly with the silence of the universe. And after all of that, there is nothing left to do but rest. Think of it this way. Philosophy, at its best, is not about solving every problem. It is about keeping us company in the questions. Tonight, these thinkers have walked beside you, not as stern professors, but as fellow wanderers in the night. They too stayed awake, asking, why? They too felt the dizziness of choice, the heartbreak of suffering, the absurdity of silence. And yet, they kept living. They kept writing, loving, laughing, sipping coffee, telling stories. If they could find ways to carry on, so can you. So now, imagine laying down your own boulder. Whatever you've carried with you through this day, the worries, the choices, the unfinished tasks, let them roll gently to the side. There will be time to push them again tomorrow. Tonight, you are free to rest. Feel the bed beneath you, steady and soft. Feel the blankets over you, like the solidarity of community, like the warmth of the Mediterranean sun against the chill of Russian snow. Feel your breath rising and falling, like the tide, like the rhythm of existence itself. Each inhale, a small rebellion. Each exhale, a quiet surrender. You do not need to solve anything tonight. You do not need to prove anything tonight. The universe is silent, but you are safe in its silence. And as your thoughts grow softer, imagine drifting through a landscape where the philosophers you've met tonight sit quietly, sipping their coffee, nodding as if to say, "It's all right, you've thought enough. Now it's time to dream." Camus' Sisyphus sets down his boulder for a moment and leans back, smiling. Dostoevsky's underground man puts down his pen and lets the lamp go dark. Kierkegaard closes his book, sighs deeply, and finally rests. Even Sartre stops scribbling and allows himself to exhale. They too are human. They too must sleep, and so must you. Drift now, gently, into the dreamscape. Let the questions fade like smoke in the night. Let your mind uncoil, your body sink, your breath slow. The silence that once felt heavy now feels like a cradle. The nothingness is not to be feared. It is a soft lullaby, rocking you towards sleep. And so, we've reached the end of our journey tonight. If your eyes are already heavy, let them close and drift into deep, peaceful sleep. You've thought enough for one day. Rest well, dream kindly, and know the questions will still be here tomorrow. But if you're somehow still awake, there are 2 more stories waiting for you on the screen, just a click away. And if you've enjoyed this cozy wander through philosophy, don't forget to subscribe. Join us for more nights of thought, laughter, and calm. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next one.